So I'm thrilled to introduce Nurul today, and she will be speaking on designing for underrepresented women in tech. Nurul, over to you, please.
Hello. Hi, I'm just going to share my screen, so just bear with me for a while. Can everyone see this? Okay, great. So I'll be talking to you about designing for underrepresented women in tech. My name is Nurul. Thank you so much for having me here. So firstly, hold on, yes, all right. An introduction. For those of you who don't know us, the Cadet Project is a nonprofit. We're aiming to get more minority Muslim women into technology. And why technology is really because we feel like it is the space which is the most level playing field right now for long-term economic change. And the way that we want to see long-term economic change for our community is through three things. Firstly, through developing tech skills, and that's through workshops, hackathons, through classes. The second is through building a collaborative community, and that's a community that is a safe space for women to explore, learn, and really get the success that they deserve. And the third one is on reclaiming narratives of success to include underrepresented women's stories. And what that means is that we often see narratives of success, whether they're online, whether they're in person, in advertisements, in the news, that really represent very narrow ideas of success and what success is, what success should be, who do we think of when we think of who is successful. We want to expand that definition and create the opportunity for people to reimagine what success should look like and for that to be more diverse. So, why we needed to think about design. I'm going to preface all this with the last point, which is, but I'm not a designer. So I've been invited to speak about design and the way that, we've designed things at the Cadet Project a couple of times. And every time I do say, well, I'm not a designer. But what I've tried to do is figure out ways with my team on how we can address some of these questions and how we can address some of these concerns. And why we needed to think about design in the first place was something that came up very early when we started the Cadet Project in 2015. I started in December 2015. We had a small amount of money that was given to us. And one of the first things that I did was actually go out and ask people, well, would you like to join me on this journey? And my initial team and I came up with the idea that was pretty much a best of class idea. It had been done in different areas. It was something that was quite popular at the time, which is to put people, especially underrepresented women, into long-term classes and for them to graduate with a certificate. However, when we actually ran a focus group, which was our first event in August 2016, what had come out was that a lot of minority and Muslim women had said, we're interested in technology, but we're not interested in a program that looks like this. Because this program assumes that A, we want to leave our jobs and do a program full-time, B, that there's just one aspect of tech that we want to focus on, and C, that we don't have any other responsibilities. So from that focus group, we really had to go back to the drawing board and say our problem was that we had assumed something about our user group that was not true. So it meant that we had to iterate. It became then the start of what the Cadet Project is now, which is something much more modular and something that always focuses on the needs of our core community, which is minority Muslim women in Singapore from the ages of 18 to 35 with at least a tertiary education and at least a smartphone. So that iteration with data is something that came up as something that was important for us. The second thing, the problem with knowing your user. Often women who look like me are not who are considered as users. They may not be we're not part of focus groups. We're not part of, the desired user. We may not be represented even in things like advertisements, but it doesn't mean that we don't exist. We clearly exist. We're part of the tech space. We're using tech products. We're part of the tech industry. So what then the tension was that we needed to design something which was not imagined, because in many ways we were invisible within this industry. So it's about us imagining the invisible because we were not imagined users. And this underlines something that I will talk about, which is what is the problem with knowing your user? If you're assuming that your user is who you've preconceived as your user, or even, for example, the people who've always been your users, then there are some things that you may be missing out. The third part of this, design is in the details. when you're designing for different groups of people, it's not just the first layer of what you're designing for that is important, that you want a hackathon for women. It's also in the details. Like, what are you doing to make this actually more attractive for women? What are you doing that actually shows that you're a welcoming environment? What are you doing as a company to show that you're committed to diversity? So these are all important aspects of when you're designing something for a target market. So finally, learning from best practice. I did allude to this a bit earlier, which is when we started the Cadet Project and some of the issues that we had run into. But one thing that I would like to challenge, I would like to ask you to challenge as well, is why are some practices considered best, and how can we then learn from them? However, at the end of the day, I am not a designer. Please do not ask me technical questions, or you can, and I'll try to answer them. That's fine. My experience of design has really been as a practitioner, as someone that has been forced to use design and to use design in ways to make things better. So that's really where I'm coming from, and I hope my experience will be useful. I'm going to go through two case studies, which is on how we've created events for underrepresented women. The first one will be on Singapore's first women-only hackathon, Tech for Good in 2018, which we ran again in 2019. And the second is our Success Looks Like This project in 2019 and in 2022. So as you can see, I have left the Shutterstock label on this photo, and that's done on purpose. So this is part of a set of photos that we took for the first Success Looks Like This project in 2019, where we looked at creating a set of stock photos of minority and Muslim women using tech and being in the tech industry in order to reimagine what tech would look like if minority and Muslim women played a larger role in the tech industry. And we, I believe, were the first people to actually create photos that represented this on Shutterstock or on one of these stock photo websites. In 2022, we did change things a little bit, and we created instead the first photo exhibition in Singapore, which showed women, actual women working in tech. Going to the actual case studies. So first, the Tech for Good hackathons. So let me give you a bit of the context around what hackathons looked like before 2018. The problem with a lot of hackathons was that a lot of them had a very different user in mind. A lot of our conversations now around diversity, around representation of women in tech are pretty new. But when the Cadet Project started, a lot of these conversations were not really happening. What we saw instead was the assumption that women were not attending hackathons, women were not an active part of the tech industry because we didn't want to be, which fundamentally is not true. We saw a lot of people assuming that the norms that we saw in the tech industry were normal. But the norms in the tech industry fundamentally are not normal because they come from actions that have actions in the past that have come from certain assumptions, certain limitations, certain preconceptions. And hence, norms are not value neutral. Norms really come from a place where we have to ask the question, why is it normal? And the problem with a lot of hackathons was that they assumed a norm for a very specific kind of user. They assumed that users would be available for 24-hour, 48-hour hackathons, for example, that users would be available for multiple weekends, that users would be available on perhaps, days, on evenings after work. They assumed that women who would be attending would not be women with childcare responsibilities. They assumed that women who would be attending didn't have other responsibilities. So a lot of the assumptions with hackathons did not understand the users. We were the first hackathon in Singapore to provide childcare. We were the first hackathon in Singapore to provide breastfeeding rooms. And I just want to say that providing breastfeeding rooms is literally a no cost. It's something that's no cost. It's just an empty room. Right? And we also provided rooms that were both prayer and meditation rooms, as well as food for people who had different needs, like people who needed halal food and people who need vegetarian food. Our prayer and meditation rooms were for people that might have felt a little bit anxious. If this is your first time at a hackathon, that's fine. You had a place to just kind of rest for a while. We scheduled our hackathon on one weekend from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. so that women who in Asia still bear the a disproportionate burden when it comes to caring, when it comes to being primary carers, whether it's for the household or for children or for the elderly. And it allowed women with these responsibilities greater flexibility to attend, because they could then, if they needed to, go home and attend to some of these responsibilities. Um, so a lot of it was us providing what was necessary and what hadn't been thought about, even at that time, by the larger tech conferences that had perhaps 10,000 people from around the region flying in, but would not have a breastfeeding or a prayer room. And to us, that was shocking. And it was shocking because we're a group of that we're still volunteers. Everyone on my team is a volunteer. We all have a day job. We were very fresh and very new to this industry, and we got a lot of pushback because it was assumed that if it hadn't already been designed, it wasn't going to be. And I think that that's something that we need to understand if we're designing to solve a problem. Just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it. There are really other alternatives to it. And for us, it was also an iterating. The first time we did it, we sold out in 2 weeks. The second time we did it, we doubled the number of seats available, and we also sold out in about 2 to 3 weeks. Each time, the number of minority and Muslim women was about 50%. What that means is that even though our target group and our target users were a smaller subset of women in tech, what we had created was we had created a signal to show the women that we were an inclusive community, and we would accept you as long as you were a woman. For a woman of any age, the youngest person was 8. She came again in 2019. She was 9. The oldest people were in their 40s, and that we would accept people from any background. And those iterations and understandings of what we needed to do were actually important for us to provide a solution. And we managed to prove that women were interested in hackathons. We managed to prove that women were interested in the tech industry. So post our first hackathon, once we brought it out and we used this as a point in talking to partners and talking to different organizations, we were able to say, well, you know, the assumption that perhaps you might have had that women are unable or incapable or uninterested is fundamentally incorrect, because we've done this and we've said that we've every time had more women show up than we've had space for. So so these are some photos of what we've done. You have our first photo from our first hackathon, Tech for Good in 2018. Everyone's really happy. I was really happy. It was exhausting. We pulled this together at the last minute because we had so much pushback. It had been very hard for us to actually find a space. The second one is on your left-hand side, the larger group of people where we had doubled in size. Both times it was really amazing to see that we had women who'd been out of tech for years who'd come back to just try their hand out at a hackathon, students, young people who had never been in tech before, come down and say, well, this is a space where we felt safe enough to experiment. And that was a very, very powerful moment for us. Now let me go to the second case study, which is the Success Looks Like This program that we did in 2019 and 2022. A big thing of what we do at the Cadet Project is imagining the invisible. So I believe about 5 to 6 years ago, there was a survey that was done in Singapore that said only about 5% of startup founders were female. And within that 5%, the number of minority founders was actually extremely minimal. So in many ways, we have been invisible within the tech industry. And for us, that means that our imaginations of success and what success looks like has been determined by people who don't look like us. And the pushback for that is for us to then imagine the success that hasn't been imagined for us. Imagine success that has been unimaginable. So we did the first set of photos with minority and Muslim women in tech on Shutterstock, which I did show to you earlier. And we did the first photo exhibition on women in tech in Singapore. And the reason why we moved for that iteration was that the first thing that we did was that we presented options so that when organizations, when companies, when the news, you know, for example, people come to us and they're like, well, we don't have examples that we can use within our articles or on our websites that we can say, well, you do now. We've created this, and if you would like to actually commit to having diversity and representation, we hope that we've made it easier for you by providing this. We have had people buy our photos on Shutterstock, and to us that's proven that this is a need that was simply just not addressed. The second time around when we did it, we decided to shift focus and actually look at the real life stories of women that were in tech, that are currently in tech in Singapore. And that's in this photo. That is the current president of Singapore, Madam Halimah Yacob, who launched our photo exhibition. And she's speaking to 4 women who were included in our project. And this was not only the first photo exhibition for minority women in tech, this was the first physical exhibition on women in tech in Singapore in the first place. So there was already a gap in terms of representation of women in tech, which we did try to fill. And the people that we featured were women of different backgrounds, of different nationalities, of different ages, who are all successful in the tech industry. And so for us, the iterations of this and the iterations of success meant that what we were trying to do was really to push the envelope and to challenge people into saying, well, maybe when I close my eyes and I think about what success looks like to me, there is a flaw there. There's something that I've missed out. There's something that I have not been able to imagine because what I'm consuming in terms of media representation and in terms of stories of success has been limited. But in order for me to push back against my bias, against the things that I've seen, then I can consume these stories, these visual representations of different kinds of women in tech and different stories, and start to build a different narrative as to what success looks like. And obviously, if you are a minority woman, if you're a minority Muslim woman, then having these representations means that for the first time, you will see people that look like you as representations of success and as diverse representations of success. And that recognition means that you are able to really, really imagine what your future will be, especially if you're a younger person and like a girl that's interested in tech. So this was from the launch of our first minority Muslim women in tech photos on Shutterstock. We had funding from the Awesome Foundation, we had funding from Facebook. We had women who were of different ethnicities, of different ages, and it was really good for us to kind of see what the response was like, even from people who came down and looked at our first exhibition of the stock photos, and for them to respond to it and say, well, this is something I've not seen before. So this is more detail on the exhibition of Women in Tech in Singapore that we ran this year for 1 month. That's the opening ceremony. And for us, it was interesting to see that for many people, even for the women that we featured, it was for the first time them actually saying, look, I deserve to be here. I belong in these narratives of success, because even the women that we featured, many of them had never had the experience of being part of an exhibition like this. So I've talked to you about the 2 different aspects of the 2 different case studies that I've had with the Kodak project about my journey. And now I kind of want to go back and talk about some of the key things that I feel we can do when we're improving design, when we're solving problems. The first, to really assume that norms are not normal. To push the boundaries in designing solutions, we have to question the norms that we've been given. And I think this is the way to really break the mold, and rather than creating marginal change, to create larger jumps in change, to actually question why these norms are there and what could happen if you're solving without actually taking into consideration these norms or rethinking these norms for yourself. Secondly, be the user. A huge problem that I have seen in the way that people are assuming that, okay, this design will work, or like that this product will work, this graphical representation, this social media post will work, is because the people creating it are not the users. Or if they are the users, they're a very specific subset of the user that is not diverse and that's not inclusive. So in order to create a solution that works, I think that more designers actually have to be the user. This is why for me and my team, we are 90% minority and Muslim women, even though we're different ages, different identities, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. But there is the understanding that for all of us, we're designing for a wider group. And that's important. The team has to reflect the cause. And I think that that's important when we're designing in order to solve a problem. design is in the details. So when you're creating something, make sure that you are looking at the user journey, not just from the top level, but actually from the very granular experience of how is the user experiencing that journey. What are the tweaks that you can make to actually help that user feel more included, help the user feel seen, and help the user feel like this is the place for them without it necessarily being explicit. Better practice is better than best practice. What this means to me is that we have assumptions as to what best practice looks like. We have assumptions as to what can be done if you have an infinite amount of, resources, money, time, a huge team. But there's always something that you can do better. And this is my challenge to other people that are trying to solve similar problems. Don't just look at the best practice necessarily, but look at what change can you do so that you have better practice as a designer trying to solve some of these things. And iterate with data. So what we've seen is that when you're looking at data, and we do collect data from surveys, as well as, we had a focus group, but we also look at anecdotes. What do people share post-event? What are kind of feelings that people express? You're looking at both quantitative and qualitative data in order to better inform your decision-making process and to make better practice better. One of the things that must be asked is as well with data, what is missing? So what is missing from our data, from our survey collection, from the things that we're seeing? Because one of the things that we must assume is that there are people who are simply not answering the survey because A, your survey is free and they don't have the time to do something for free. B, that if you're asking them to come down to a focus group, they don't have the time to do that. And there are all these other reasons why someone might not be part of your survey collection. And that means your data is flawed. So for a lot of people to assume that your data is accurate is, I think, the first step in creating something that is not as useful as it could be. Question why your data looks a certain way and what is actually missing from it. And the last 2 points are correlated, which is unimagined is not unimaginable and imagined that invisible. A lot of what we've done over the last 5 years are things that have been unimagined, but we did it, so it's not unimaginable. A lot of the things that we've created and that have been successful were unimaginable before we did it. And now it's taken because they did it, it's possible for other people to do it. And when you imagine the invisible, it's different from imagining something that doesn't exist. A lot of the problems that are invisible, the people that are invisible, deserve solutions, deserve to be designed for. And I think the challenge for a lot of designers is don't just look at the problems that are obvious. Break those problems down and then actually think about how can you solve the problems that no one else wants to look at, the invisible problems, the unimagined problems, and imagine so that you are doing better. So I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Follow us on social media at the Cadet Project. I have left, I think, quite a lot of time for questions. I hope there are some. Yeah, that's me.
So much, Nurul. I found that talk really inspiring, and particularly when we think about sustainable human-centric design. It's easy to say, let's make it human-centric, but we need to make sure that the human side, the human representation is as encompassing as possible. It cannot just be technology that's designed by white dudes from wealthy countries, right? It's got to be technology that's designed by people from all spectrum of society, all the different parts of the world, of different genders. And I think it is exactly initiatives like the Cadet Project that play such an important role in bringing people who are underrepresented within the technology sector into that important conversation and giving them the skills to contribute to the design process as well. I really had fantastic takeaways from what you said today, especially the fact that we need to question the norms, that norms are not normal. We shouldn't just take them as a given, and we shouldn't just depart from them and business as usual, right? We should actually sit down and reflect and really ask ourselves, why are these norms in place? How can they be better? And another fantastic takeaway from me was that designers should be the users. And indeed, very often when you use a clunky app, you're like, what was the designer thinking? And obviously, as the user, it's so clear to you why the design is failing you, right? And it's as if the designer never tried it themselves. So this whole idea of getting users to be the designers is something that I think is also quite fundamental to making design more human-centric. And then, of course, I really love the part about what you said about imagining the invisible. Because very often, again, it's a matter of what we see is what we get, right? And yet there is a lot that is underlying, that has been undiscovered, that has been unexplored, that needs to be brought to the surface so that we can take into account all of these hidden needs, all of these omissions, all of this stuff that we have overlooked, and bring it to the fore and make sure that the design is actually much more inclusive and taking into account all of these underrepresented needs. So I'm sure you've really given our audience a lot of food for thought. And one of the first questions that we have received from the audience, and I think you are the best person to answer this question: how should we do more to encourage women in girls to take on STEM education, especially since girls today remain underrepresented in STEM education?
This is a great question, and it's a question that I get quite a lot of. There's obviously multiple very long answers to this, but what I want to highlight is that a lot of the answers to this question problematize girls. So they kind of say, well, the problem is girls. Like, what do they need to do more of? Like, what aren't they doing? How do we change their behavior? And I think instead of doing that, if we actually rephrase the question and we say, let's look instead at how do we change the environments in which girls make this decision? How do we make sure that we have, for example, smaller classroom environments, especially for the STEM subjects? How do we make sure that we have better teacher-student ratios for at different ages? How do we make sure that there's access to learning for women of all different socioeconomic backgrounds? We then move away from problematizing girls and girls' behavior to saying that actually, if we create an environment in which it's easier for girls to make this decision, for girls to enter STEM, that we've provided these environments, then I think we will see more of a change. And that's a lot of what we've done as well. And that's a lot of what we've seen. We never say women are the problem when it comes to female representation in tech. We say that actually the responsibility for female representation in tech is in the tech industry. It's within institutions, it's within different organizations. It is not the fault of women that they're not there, because we've proven over and over again that when given the chance, women will choose to be part of this industry. So that's my answer.
Yes, fantastic. I agree with you. Indeed, when you ask many of these questions and many of the answers that are offered sometimes by policymakers or even foundations that support these efforts, there is always that language of problematizing the girls, that, it's an issue of lack of confidence, imposter syndrome, and so on, all of which I think on some levels are also true. But indeed, we need to look at the broader structural factors as well that may also contribute to imposter syndrome, and that may contribute to that feeling of a lack of confidence. So I'm happy to say that a couple of days ago, I gave the opening address of the Girls in Tech Day, organized by IMDA, and it was a great opportunity for me to raise issues around how initiatives like Girls in Tech Day can give young girls that empowerment, the competencies that give them greater confidence. So it's not about the girls' own confidence, it's about the society building these opportunities to boost their confidence, to vest them with the competencies. So that's a great answer to a great question. Another question I guess I would ask Nurul, because obviously you've really been at the forefront of pushing the envelope, bringing women who were previously underrepresented to the forefront. Have you found any kinds of resistance to your efforts? And what were some of these resistances, if you could share?
This is a very politely phrased question. I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, yes, the answer is yes. We have had a lot of resistance, especially at the beginning. I've been on panels at the beginning where another speaker would tell me, actually, I don't believe in diversity. And that was considered very acceptable. And to be honest, I do think that there are a lot of people who genuinely believe in that. It's just less acceptable now, 5 years on, to say. So a lot of the resistance I see is in action. The assumption for a lot of people is that, oh, okay, like if I have these initiatives for diversity, for inclusion, they're window dressing, they're difficult, they cost a lot of money. But to me, that's actually a lot of people, quite frankly, being a little bit disingenuous about the real reason why. I think that for us at the Kodak Project, we have stopped trying to justify why diversity and inclusion is important because it's the right thing to do. And that gap between people that believe that diversity and inclusion is important and people who don't believe it, that's not a logical gap. That's a moral gap. And you can't fix a moral gap with logic. So a lot of the resistance I thankfully don't feel anymore because I don't engage with people who do feel like diversity and inclusion is not important. That's the work for other people within this space, and I am, I respect them for that. For me, it's it's very tiring to have that conversation. So that's really a large part of it, the lack of belief. If you're saying that diversity and inclusion cost too much money, it's hard structurally, actually what you're saying is that there are some people that you feel are worth more than others and that deserve to be in the places that you're gatekeeping. You're saying that, other people should just be left out because it's not that having, the norms, the usual group of people that you're hiring and including isn't costing money. It's just that to you, that's a norm that you're not questioning. So we've had a lot of pushback. It's been an interesting ride, but you know it I would have less interesting stories if it was a smooth journey. So I'm happy for this. It's been nice to have successes because those successes then stand for themselves and then prove the point that all women are interested in technology. And now that we've been around for 5 years, we've had a couple of successes. We've been able to show that, look, these are things that actually women are turning out for, women are interested in. So you can't say anymore that women are not interested in tech.
Mm. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing so honestly the obstacles that you face over time. But I think it's also credit to the work of you and your colleagues that, I think over time the resistance has also worn off to some extent. So kudos to you and all your colleagues at the Kodak project. So